I'm going to see if this will work by putting this over here. Because I have some props. And if you can't hear me, I'll figure this out. Oh, the other thing that happens with age, I can either wear my glasses and see you, or I can take them off and see my speech. So let's see if this will work. Father Kaiser, thank you very much for inviting me, and Tom and Mary. It was very kind, and it gave me an opportunity to sort of reflect on a long time ago. And apparently there are lots of us lawyers who come from UT, so I'm glad that you're here. When Mary called me to ask me to speak, I had two simultaneous reactions. The first was that I was very flattered. The second was I must be getting old. And I'd like not to be reminded of that. As Kevin told you, I graduated in 1979, which was the 100th graduating class of U of D. I started at the High in 1975. And for those of you who don't remember, or for those of you who weren't there, August 1975 was 1 year after Richard Nixon resigned on August 8, 1974. It was 4 months after the fall of Saigon on April 29, 1975. During my time at the High, many momentous things happened. In the summer of 1977, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched to take advantage of a rare alignment of the giant gas planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and they could make a flyby of all four. And as a measure of just how long ago 1975 is, those spacecraft are now at the very edge of the solar system. And Voyager 1 is 11 billion miles from Earth and is still beaming back data. I'm still talking so large crowds. But in September 1978, the Camp David Accords were signed. And at least as of today, they remain in place. And I'll be traveling to Cairo tomorrow, and I hope all remains well for my 3-day stay there. The really big event that happened when I was at the High occurred on May 25th, 1977. Star Wars was released. And this was the real first Star Wars. I saw this movie 13 times the summer that it came out. To date, the Star Wars franchise has generated more than $27 billion. My first impressions of the High both relate to music. In 8th grade, my football coach, who was an alumnus of the High, brought me to a basketball game to introduce me to the school. He wanted me to come here. The gym was filled, and excitement was in the air. This was exciting. And then just before the team came running out onto the court, these gigantic speakers pumped out Bachman Turner Overdrive, "You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet," turned up to 11. And it was amazing. This was the place that I had to be for high school. My first impression of freshman year also relates to music. At the all-school mass, which I believe was held at Jesuit, there was a band. It wasn't the Grateful Dead, but they did have drums and electric guitars, and they were playing music from God's book. And I thought, I'm not Royal Oak anymore. While at the High, as Kevin mentioned, I had the privilege of being on the nationally ranked debate team, and I wish those who are on the debate team now good luck. It's a fantastic thing to do. My freshman year, we debated control of the world's scarce world resources. We argued that we could feed the world with something called krill. It turns out that there's a lot of krill, but not enough to feed the whole world. My sophomore year, we debated penal reform. And among other things, we argued about the pros and cons of the death penalty, whether or not it deterred crime, and whether or not retribution was a sufficient basis for the state to kill a person. My senior year, we debated energy policy. We learned about solar energy, photovoltaic cells, wind power, and something called slow breeder reactors, Admiral Rickover's program. Those reactors were supposed to be safe and essentially provide perpetual energy. Okay, this is the Powell Miller plan, right? Those reactors, we haven't seen a lot of nuclear reactors built, and no slow breeder reactors. We were fortunate in the 1970s. We had a forward-looking president who urged the country to conserve energy, to tax gasoline, to discourage waste, and to fund renewable energy, and to take steps to ensure that by the year 2000, 20% of the nation's energy would come from solar. Unfortunately, the 70s were followed by the 80s. In the 80s, we learned that trees cause more pollution than automobiles, and the solar panels were taken down from the White House. In addition to debate, I enjoyed my time participating in Model United Nations. I learned a great deal about international affairs and world politics, but the most salient fact that I learned occurred at NAMAN, which was a conference that we went to senior year in Washington, D.C., run by Georgetown, where, by the way, we received the highest award for representing the United Kingdom. At NAMAN, we learned that Kevin Devine's camera case carried exactly 4 cold beers and could transport those beers without our chaperones noticing. And they were cold. Who knew what camera cases was like? We were privileged to have truly great teachers. Father Polakowski and his cardigan opening the windows in February to wake us up with fresh air. Mr. Vincent, now Father Vincent, blushing while discussing the breach of the walls of Troy in the Aeneid. Mr. Forrester throwing erasers at dozing students. Mr. Tenbush telling us TS whenever we want. And Father Fallon, the Reverend George R., screaming, "Spirit has no parts," as he tried to explain the mysteries of the Trinity. It was Father Fallon who taught me my first words of Hebrew, Tohu Abohu and Yud He Vav. At some point in my sophomore year, my parents realized that they could not afford to send me and my brothers and my sister to Catholic schools. At several points, my mother, who had gone to public school in Detroit, she'd gone to Mumford, asked why it was so important for me to go to the high. Why couldn't I be happy going to the public school? At the time, I think I told her that U of D has a nationally ranked debate team, and I wanted to be on that team. But at the time, in retrospect, and even at the time, I think I understood that it went much deeper than that. But it wasn't easy to explain to her. As Father Fallon said, spirit has no parts. It was not one thing or another. It was the spirit of the high who called me, and that had become essential to me. So the question is, how did spirit manifest itself at the high? It manifested itself in commitment to hard work, critical thinking, careful, thoughtful writing. One of the most powerful experiences of this for me were the 2 years that I studied with Father Polakowski. Polo taught us that we should read with a pen in our hands, that we should engage in it, that we should underline important parts with straight lines and squiggly lines, write in the margins. Don't just read, but engage. Ask questions, think, challenge. Polo said that when we were done with the book, it should look like we had picked it up and thrown it against a wall or had slept with it. As proof that I took Father Polakowski's instruction to heart, this is the anthology we used my sophomore year, held together with a U of D High walkathon bumper sticker. And it's filled with underlining and margin notes, and I treasure this. And, by the way, if your spouse ever asks you why you need to keep all that memorabilia in the attic, the answer is you might be asked to speak at the long day. And you need proof that your memory isn't fiction. I think only Polo would have assigned the Brothers Karamazov as the last book, second semester of senior year. Despite the warm weather and the many distractions of senior year, I managed to read it. And the Brothers became one of the most transformative books of my life. Polo's philosophy is captured well. Captured well by a quote from Harvey Cox's The Seduction of Spirit, which he contributed to a special edition of the Cub News in May of 1976. Imagine someone keeping in a box that his wife has told him to get rid of. Find a Cub News. So, Harvey Cox said the following: "The course is over now. As I think about it, I do not care very much the facts that they remember in 10 years about Merton or Bonhoeffer. What I hope they did learn is that their own personal lives as well as those of Wiesel and Kazantzakis, are enormously significant, utterly unique, and endlessly intriguing. I want them to honor and attend to that life. I hope they learn that anyone who in any future course or anywhere else asks them to deny their own inner reality is asking something wholly unacceptable. I hope they learn to fight off the invasion of the body snatchers, never to have their tears and love sneered away by any big brother. I hope they learn how to keep so closely in touch with their own stories that no one can force them into some role required by a new world, brave or otherwise. The spirit of the Jesuits and of this place manifested in two other ways that stand out to me as I look back on my years here. As we all know, U of D struggled beginning in the mid-1970s. Enrollment was down, the school was in debt, the other Catholic schools had left, some would say fled, the city. The question was, should U of D do the same? Any business analysis would have dictated that the school move. Most of those who could pay tuition were not living in the city, and many of them would not come south of 8th. The school needed paying students to survive. In January 1977, the Jesuits took the difficult road and decided to stay right here. Teaching the boys of Detroit how to be men for others was the school's mission. Moving would be to abandon that mission. The high stayed in the city. It struggled for many years. But we survived. And today the school thrives on South Cambridge Avenue. That risky, brave decision flowed from the spirit of the Jesuits and from this community. There was another brave decision that I recall, and to paraphrase Marco Rubio, I am not a theology man, but this is what I remember. In early 1979, newly installed Pope John Paul II issued his first encyclical. The encyclical, while stating that it supported the work of Vatican II, instructed that there should be stricter access to communion at Mass, that is, to practicing Catholics. The high was almost entirely Christian, but it was not entirely Catholic. At the Baccalaureate Mass that June, after the consecration, it was either Father Canfield or Father Polakowski walked to the front of the altar, and he told us, anyone who finds the Eucharist meaningful is invited to participate in community. We were a community united by a communal understanding that we were doing something grounded in a transcendent purpose. On that day, while maintaining the sanctity of the sacrament, the Jesuits made it clear that we were a community, and they would not readily allow the community to be divided. I was also privileged to attend another Jesuit institution, Georgetown University. If Georgetown ever invites me to speak, I'll talk about Georgetown. The first secular school that I attended was the University of Michigan Law School. And although it's a fantastic school, I had the feeling that something was missing. The school demanded much of what the Jesuits did, critical thinking, hard work, excellent writing. But what was missing was a transcendent purpose. The school taught us to be excellent lawyers, but we were not trained to be lawyers for others. There were plenty of opportunities to work in the public interest, and the school encouraged it. But learning for something bigger than ourselves did not seem to be at the heart of the school's mission. So, getting to the topic that I was asked to speak on, which is what my Jesuit education means to me in my daily law practice. I think the biggest influence that my Jesuit education has had is that it led me to the right law firm. I have been a Jenner and Block since the day I got out of law school, and have not looked back. I had originally wanted to practice in Washington, D.C., and I clerked for a great litigation firm there after second year of law school. But again, there was something missing. First, the firm was predominantly male. There were very few female attorneys, so the firm didn't reflect the world around it. Second, while the firm had excellent trial attorneys, I felt that something was missing as I did when I was at U of M. Then I interviewed at Jenner, and I apologize, I don't like to brag about myself, I do like to brag about Jenner, and there's a little bit of that that's going to go on. Jenner was founded in 1918 by a Jew, a Catholic, and a Protestant. It was one of the first firms in Chicago to hire women as lawyers. In 1986, when I joined the firm, the associates at the firm were about half men and half women. Jenner had a tradition as a litigation firm with excellent trial attorneys, but just as important was that Jenner was committed to giving back to the community through pro bono work. Everyone I interviewed with had worked on pro bono matters throughout their careers. And since I joined, the firm has consistently been recognized for its pro bono program. The American Lawyer has named Jenner as among the top 10 law firms for pro bono work every year since 1990. And it's been the #1 pro bono firm in the country in 1998, 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011. I just attended a partners meeting yesterday. And the pro bono coordinator got up and said that last year Jenner & Block devoted 77,000 hours to pro bono matters. That is an average, not just for associates, that is an average for attorney of more than 150 hours of pro bono for last year. Multiply that by the average, what it costs for an average hour, that opportunity cost is extraordinary. More importantly, it lets us do a lot of really good things. Jerry Solovey, who was the chairman of our firm for many years and who passed away a couple of years ago, always said that when you ask a lawyer what cases they remember the most, they always talk about their pro bono cases. My pro bono work pales in comparison to the work of my partners. Jerry Solovey successfully argued the Witherspoon case, which had the effect of freeing more than 300 people from the country's death rows. My partner Paul Smith successfully argued against discrimination against gays and lesbians in Lawrence versus Texas. The same year that my former partner Don Barilli put teeth back into the Strickland standard by successfully arguing the Wiggins case for his death row client. Jenner represented 19 inmates held in Guantanamo Bay, the vast majority of whom were there as a result of mistaken identity or as a result of tribal feuds. People who had done nothing wrong, but who had been denied access to the writ of habeas corpus by their captors. As my partner Tom Sullivan testified before Congress, this country's treatment of prisoners in Guantanamo has been shameful. The cases that have affected me the most have also been my pro bono matters. And I want to talk about one. I represented a man on Illinois' death row for 10 years. The night after jury selection started, my client, Ulysses Montgomery, attempted to commit suicide. When the trial was being rescheduled a few months later, the public defender, his lawyer, met ex parte with the trial judge in his chambers. The lawyer explained Ulysses' horrible childhood surrounded by drugs, alcohol, poverty. The judge said, "Well, why don't you plead him guilty and I'll give him life?" And then he rolled his eyes and said, "Well, I guess the cat's out of the bag now." After pressuring Ulysses, they stipulated to the state's case. He waived his right to a jury and for sentencing, and then his lawyers put on a pro forma mitigation case, a couple of days, a couple of family members. Following the hearing, the judge sentenced Ulysses to death. We were called in after Ulysses lost his direct appeal. As a second-year associate, I spent 800 hours tracking down Ulysses' family history and psychological history, none of which had been reviewed by the public defenders. And to their credit, public defenders are way overlooked. It was not their fault. But Ulysses had a significant psychological family history that showed that from day one, he had been deprived and was showing signs of need of help, which he never received. What we did in his post-conviction proceeding is we submitted affidavits by psychiatrists, by social workers, by dozens of witnesses who would have testified at his mitigation hearing had they been called to do so. At the first evidentiary hearing, one of our witnesses, who had been a public defender at the time of the original trial, was now a sitting judge in the same courthouse as the judge whose conduct we were attacking. The judge flipped on us. As a fourth-year associate, I impeached a sitting judge with his own affidavit. Mr. Greenwald, you know that you drafted that affidavit. Your Honor, is that your signature? Did you sign this affidavit under oath? Did you read the affidavit to make sure that it was accurate before you signed it? We lost that. As it turned out, the judge who flipped on us was later found to have embezzled fines paid by defendants in his courtroom, and he served time in prison. We prevailed on appeal in the Illinois Supreme Court. And by the way, there was only one dissenting opinion, and it was Justice Miller, who's now my partner. Unfortunately, he didn't sway the court. As we were preparing for a second evidentiary hearing on remand, we received a letter that had been sent to a local reporter that claimed that the state had suborned perjury during the first evidentiary hearing. So I deposed the senior prosecutor to determine whether there was any basis for those allegations. That prosecutor is now an appellate court judge in Illinois. We found nothing, but I still would prefer not to appear. While the habeas petition was pending in federal court, something good happened. The departing governor of Illinois emptied death row, commuting Ulysses' sentence to life without parole. Both Ulysses and Governor Ryan are currently incarcerated in Illinois prison, although I think in very different prisons. As I tell my clients, after you've represented someone on death row, you just don't sweat coercion cases. I have lots of horror stories about billable work, but the pro bono work that we as a firm do as a community is what I am most proud of about my daily practice. I thought I would leave you with a poem that we read in Father Polakowski's sophomore English class. It is by a man who ran a bookstore in San Francisco, the first bookstore devoted to paperback books. And Lawrence Ferlinghetti's poem is as applicable to lawyers, I think, as it is to poets. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entrechats and sleight of foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without making anything or mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he's the super realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step, in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch, where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. And he, a little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form, spread eagle in the empty air of existence.